Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. We need to talk about the events of the last 24 hours as I perceive it. Now, before we dive into this, because your time is precious, I don't want to waste it. As usual, I just got to say, if you are making a comment and you see a comment underneath your comment, a reply from someone who looks like me, might have the avatar and might have, some elaborate name, Canadian Prepper _ whatever. That is not me. Those are scam accounts. I have to say this every 10 videos or so because people keep succumbing to these accounts and people are giving these people money. These are scam accounts. Please use your discretion, whether you're watching this channel or any other channel. If the person who's replying to you doesn't have that certified check mark next to it, that is not me. That is not the owner of that channel that you're speaking to. Okay, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now let's talk about everything that's going on. Has the nuclear threat level been reduced in the last 24 hours? No. Complete 180, complete opposite. Things are far worse than they've ever been in this conflict so far. I'm going to give you the reasons why. Everybody talks about the election. The Republicans, it wasn't the wave that everybody had anticipated that it was going to be. I'm not going to comment on politics. Regardless, foreign policy is not going to change one iota. You're going to have those outliers and those who bring a contrarian or alternative viewpoint to Congress, okay? And you're always going to have that, but they're never going to be in the majority. U.S. foreign policy is going full speed ahead in their support of the Ukraine war. Mark my words, this is only the beginning. The situation as it develops in Kherson today with a Russian retreat, we're going to talk about that, what that means for nuclear escalation. We're going to talk about whether or not this so-called meeting with the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty between Russia and the United States is a good sign or a bad sign, among other things. We need to talk about a lot, so let's just dive right into it. Let's start off with this idea that the U.S. State Department is going to meet with the Russian counterparts and discuss a New START treaty. Basically what this is a strategic arms reduction treaty in order to regulate the amount of nuclear warheads with the hope and the ideal of eventually getting rid of nukes altogether. Why will this never happen? Because China is not a part of this. So long as the U.S. and Russia stifle their own nuclear programs, they run the risk of losing the edge over the Chinese, who are not party to any sort of agreement. This is why this is all just talk, and both sides know it. Both sides know that it's just a stalling tactic. And this is the problem that you run into with peace treaties and peace proposals, is that at least in this point in time, based on what I've seen with this conflict, is both sides have just been exploiting it as an opportunity to try to stall the other, to try to get the other side to make some sort of concessions on the current battlefield. And both sides realize this now. So for me, this pledge that Russia and the United States have agreed to hold a bilateral meeting on the New START treaty implementation in the near future, it's, for one, they haven't inked a date. And even if they do ink a date, the fact that they're having this conversation right now, in light of everything else that's going on, is really a sign that the nuclear tension has risen to such an extent that they feel so compelled to make this public knowledge that they're going to be having these conversations, that both sides want to appease and alleviate any anxieties that the public might have about nuclear escalation. The fact of the matter is, never before in history, in the last 24 hours, we have been closer to nuclear Armageddon than we've ever been before, for a variety of different reasons that we are going to get into today. And remember, it does not matter who wins the Congress, who wins the majority of the seats in the House or the Senate. It's not going to matter one iota. They're going full steam ahead. Mark my words, the most important issue for voters was, I believe it was abortion and inflation. Okay, so people aren't even concerned about foreign policy that much. And for that reason, they're absolutely going to stay the course. Now, the U.S. envoy to the UN has sent Russia a strong warning against nuclear escalation. And they have said that America would unleash the full force of its response if Russia carried out its horrific threats of a nuclear strike against its enemies. The full force of its response. Okay? And they are saying that the entire world would turn on the Russians if the Russians used a tactical nuke or a nuclear weapon in this situation. Well, here's the reality of that situation. China don't care. Okay, China is not going to, nor will India care ultimately, because you see, they're viewing the world through a different lens. You have BRICS, you have all these agreements being made between all these other countries. When the US envoy says the world, they're talking about the golden billion, as Putin calls them. Basically us, okay, the Western world, not the other 7 billion people. The other 7 billion people are just scrambling to try to survive. They could care less, to be brutally honest. Now, the thing is, they also know that the nuclear weapons that Russia would actually deploy on the battlefield are very low radiation weapons. The Russians' tactical nukes are designed to generate very little radiation. Most people don't realize this. The real threat, of course, is in the chain of escalation after they use one of these things to the strategic level. Many have said, many experts in the field have said that if if Russia uses a tactical nuke in Ukraine, the US will not respond in using nuclear weapons. So she's saying that they will respond with the full force of its response, unleash the full force of its response, whatever that means. I'm guessing they're talking about conventional response in that regard. Regardless, a conventional response will just beget more of a tactical nuke style response. And I've long since suspected that nuclear weapons and the use of low yield and low radiation nuclear weapons will become normalized in the battlefield. I think we're on the cusp of seeing that take place, where the threshold for deploying strategic forces is moved a little bit down the road, because I can foresee a situation where the Pentagon starts making excuses like, well, this was a low radiation weapon that they used and it was tactical, but it was very isolated, and starting to provide I can already hear them talking about that already. Now, if you think that Congress is going to change their tune on Ukraine, get a load of this. Pentagon expects Congress to provide wartime purchasing power. I thought we weren't at war. Apparently we are. Bill LaPlante, the Pentagon's chief weapons buyer, said he expects Congress to grant the authority to allow wartime purchasing power at a level not seen since the Cold War. War economy, anyone? That's the only way we're getting out of this. The markets are tanking once again today, and gold is way the hell up. But like I've said before, I know it's a sidebar here, disregard the price of gold. The price of gold is irrelevant. The price of gold is always the same, relatively, more or less. The only thing that fluctuates is the value of the dollar. To continue arming Ukraine, LaPlante has been calling for the Pentagon to be granted the authority to lock in multi-year contracts for weapon purchases, which are typically reserved for procuring naval vessels and warplanes. The idea is to get arms makers the incentive to ramp up production. Why would they need to ramp up production? They just came out with the revisions to the U.S. nuclear posture, which of course indicates that they're going to do a complete overhaul of their nuclear weapons, because they've realized that the Russians at nearly every turn are far more advanced with their nuclear arsenal. I just talked with David Pine. We're going to be releasing that interview probably tomorrow or the next day. And most people have no idea how disproportionate and how behind the United States is compared to the Russians and their variety of different super weapon, nuclear, EMP, missile defense systems are. It's staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And that is why the Stratcom chief has basically said and warned that the big one is coming and that they need to prepare for it. Ukraine is preparing for a nuclear strike by Russia. We're going to get to the Kherson situation in a bit. I know that's fresh on all the Russia bros' minds. We're going to talk about, and I'm going to give you my perspective on what is really going on there. And I assure you, it's probably deviating a little bit from what you're hearing on either side of the fence. Ukraine has held exercises yesterday to prepare for a nuclear strike as fears about the use of nuclear weapons by Russian Vladimir Putin grow. And yes, that whole risk of dirty bomb stuff, that is still being floated by the Kremlin. They are still trying to reach out to Western officials, warning them that they think that Ukraine is going to be utilizing a dirty bomb. Are they just trying to set the precedent for a false flag and blame it on the Ukrainians and then give them the incentive to go and use their own tactical nuclear weapons? We don't know yet. But what we do know is that the risk of nuclear escalation is higher today than it's ever been in history. The reason why I say in history is because previously we didn't have the same capacity to destroy ourselves as we did today. Yes, at the height of the Cold War, there perhaps were periods, but there wasn't a hot war going on during those times like there is now. Not one that is so consequential in its long-term economic impacts as this one. Okay, where should we go with this? Let's just dive in. Actually, you know what? We got to talk about this because apparently I've been reading about this for the last couple days. I wasn't sure what to make of it when it first came out, like 2 or 3 days ago. But there's been these emergency action messages that have been sent throughout the U.S. military. Typically, maybe on the worst day, you might see 2 or 3 of these sent out in a day. Apparently, within the last 48 hours, there's been 32 of these emergency action messages. A wave of concern is caused by the information that the U.S. Army sent 32 emergency action messages in 48 hours to their nuclear forces. Now, all we know that has transpired, I mean, if you've been paying attention for the last few weeks, we've talked about situations that Green Greg's brought up the other day with all the transponders in the aircraft shutting off in the U.S. military. All of the planes just basically went dark last week. Okay, this is an indication that something is going on, that exercises are being run. There's talk that certain planes are being moved to different facilities, bunkers being stocked, and a lot of it right now is anecdotes and conjecture, but there are just too many warning signs right now. Rishi Sunak being rushed out of that meeting at COP27 the other day. At the same time, news coming out that there was a fire on a nuclear submarine. If there's ever a submarine you didn't want a fire breaking out on, it's probably one with a nuclear reactor on it and nuclear missiles. Apparently had 2 Trident missiles on it. This could have been part of the reason for these emergency messages. I'm sure these messages would go out if they're, a nuclear armed submarine caught on fire, because perhaps they couldn't rule out whether or not it was targeted, whatever. But this was so significant that this submarine obviously had to emerge, thus giving up its location to Russian satellites. Now, one of the weapons that me and David Pine talked about yesterday was the Belgorod and the Poseidon nuclear weapon system. And the whole point of this nuclear drone system is basically to create a big enough explosion that it could actually take out NATO's nuclear submarines without having to get too close. They could do it from like 50 miles away, these 100 megaton Poseidon nukes. Okay, so the whole point is to basically eliminate the ability of the other side to do a first strike. And really, that is the only part of the nuclear triad which stands a chance at surviving a first strike. And that is the nuclear submarines that are at sea, of which there's not many, and apparently Britain only has 3 left at sea. So, this is important, okay? I just wanted to share that with you guys because I think, in light of all the other evidence that we're seeing right now, to have such an incident where all these emergency action messages, whether it's an exercise or real world, is an indication that things are getting very, very intense. Now, what the hell is going on in Kherson? Now, this is the thing that raised my eyebrows a bit. If you didn't know, Russia has officially retreated from Kherson. They're going back over the river to the left bank of the river. I hate this terminology because it confuses the hell out of people. They're staying on the south side of the river, geographically speaking. Okay, they're on the south side of the river in the direction that it's oriented in right now. Basically, the left of the bank means you look at the flow of the direction of the river, and the flow of the river is this way. So the left is going to be down. That's where they're heading right now. That's where they're retreating to. Even though the lines have been relatively stable for several weeks. So there was no real reason for the Russians to do this. They had heavy fortifications in there. They had like 40,000 guys. So something is going on. And this is the dead giveaway for me that things are not as they seem. And the guy who gave it away, and this is where I think they kind of screwed up in their little scheme. Okay, Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen leader who is now like third or fourth in command of the Russian military, agreed with the decision. This is a guy who went on Telegram and openly denounced the retreat from Kharkov. You remember that big retreat that the Russians did from the Kharkov Oblast, losing hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of territory, or retreating from that? He was very outspoken in his criticism of that move. Yet today he comes out and he says, why wasn't this done from the first days of the special operation? This is a guy who's headstrong, blitzkrieg, very aggressive, never wanting to give up an inch of territory, suddenly saying that he agrees with the general's decision. And why haven't they done it sooner? So this in and of itself, this is inconsistent with his behavior in the past. Very, very inconsistent. So this tells me that perhaps that the suspicions Ukrainians had that this was a bit of a trap, or that this is contrived on some level, I think there's some legitimacy to that. Remember, this is not like they've been announcing this for a long time. They've been publicizing this retreat for a long time, almost welcoming the Ukrainians in. So they're at the same time, they're saying, however, that they're losing 8 times less the amount of guys. Okay, they're saying that the Ukrainians are losing 8 times more equipment and manpower than they are in Kherson. So why is it that they're leaving? Or why is it that they feel the need to abandon this region if they're doing so well? Something doesn't add up. Now, they're saying that the strategic reason for doing so is there's this bridge/dam called the Kharovka. I can't pronounce the exact name of it. I always butcher anything on the battlefield map here. But one of the main dam up the road is what the Ukrainians have been targeting with HIMARS, according to the Russians. And they're claiming that they're going to blow that bridge, and that would basically cause their 40,000 troops there to be isolated and surrounded and inundated with floodwaters, and that they would all be captured. Now, this is a possibility. However, I will say that now the likelihood of them ever capturing this region again diminishes significantly. If the Ukrainian lines get spread thin, like I think they are hoping, and that they're hoping that they're going to perhaps redirect and reroute some of these forces elsewhere on the battlefield and thus weaken Ukraine over the next couple months and then come back to this region later, maybe. But the Ukrainians are just going to blow the bridges, when they get the chance, and basically make it so that, the Russians aren't going to be able to transgress onto that side of the river. And they're going to be ferrying people over. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that this was a very strategic place that they lost. But again, who am I? I'm not, I'm an armchair general, to be brutally honest. So I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But that to me was one of the dead giveaways that Kadyrov was so supportive of this. This is a guy who probably has been told to shut his mouth many, many times because he speaks a little too explicitly and out of sync with Putin's strategy, and certainly the farthest thing from diplomatic. So I think that there's a lot more to this story than we're seeing. I will say that, the Russians keep claiming that they're targeting this machinery, but the U.S. has only sent between 16 to 24 HIMARS rocket systems, and they're still working. So, if you haven't taken out all these HIMARS yet after months and months, and there's only been 16 to 24, something's going on. Now, a testament to the Russians' integrated missile defense is the fact that the bridge that they left on is still standing and that the dam is still standing. So we know that they're targeting these things, and we know that the US military has lied about how effective Russian missile defense is, but I think that there's definitely an ulterior motive on behalf of the Russians with respect to this pullback, and it seems very, very suspicious, okay, that they would abandon this region. The armed forces of Ukraine do not abandon offensive attempts despite high losses in manpower and equipment. All enemy attacks have been timely suppressed. So if that's the case, then why would they leave, right? Because it seems like they would incur more hardship than they would if they stayed there, unless they had intelligence. Now this is where this might explain, this next piece of information might explain exactly what's going on. Now, apparently, there was a story floated about this a few weeks ago that the Russians had hacked the US command and control system Delta, and that all of the Ukrainian plans were leaked. Now, around the same time, General Surovkin, General Armageddon, came on TV and said we may have to make some tough decisions. Could it be that at that time they caught wind of everything the Ukrainians and the US were planning, and they had to make some adjustments, and they know that they are planning something for this region, like perhaps just sending a barrage of rockets to that dam, so many so that even with the missile defense there, they're going to overwhelm the system, or whatever the case might be. Or perhaps they know now of another weak point in NATO's plan. This whole hacked command and control system, the problem I have with it is that why would you announce that? Why would you publicize that? If you had that kind of information, if there ever was something you would want to keep secret, it would be that. The anonymous hacker group called Joker DPR hacked the highly publicized US Delta command and control program. The Delta system is a system for collecting, processing, and displaying information about enemy forces, coordinating defense forces, and providing all situational data in accordance with NATO standards. This was the grand master plan, guys. And apparently, the Russians got access to this. So they probably know something that we don't. I just have a few images of what you would be looking at if you were looking at this system. And there's just a variety of different icons, and it's a map, it's information. And so it just tells you where forces are going, and you would click on all of those things, and it would provide you a detailed assessment of what was happening on the battlefield and what the plans were, what the direction of mobility was, and all the rest. So definitely, I think that the fact that they didn't press ahead, it says something, because they could have stayed there and they could have had their soldiers die as martyrs. They could have been defeated, even if they were defeated. But the fact that they're willing to risk embarrassment, and the fact that Putin is willing to put his reputation on the line and perhaps, lose popularity with his voters, his countrymen, tells me that they must have a plan, or they must know something. The fact that they're okay with being embarrassed like this tells me that there's a bigger plan being hatched here. Otherwise, I think they would likely sacrifice these guys, make martyrs out of them. If, worst came to worst, they would be martyrs, and that would just galvanize the population to do more. So something tells me that there's definitely more to this, and they know a lot that we don't. Now, again, as I indicated, Anatoly Antonov has said, he's the Russian ambassador to the US, has said that he continues to state that Kiev wants to create some kind of dirty bomb and that they have evidence of this. In the wake of Russia's warnings, the International Atomic Energy Agency dispatched a mission to Ukraine claiming that its inspectors found no undeclared nuclear materials or activities after visiting 3 Ukrainian research facilities. And this basically they use as evidence that the allegations regarding the bomb was unfounded. However, according to Anatoly, he says that we told IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi that he must be vigilant because these facilities are not the only ones where a dirty bomb can be produced. Okay, maybe. I don't know, maybe this is all just a rub. And the Russians are preparing to, do a false flag attack. It could very well be. But apparently, according to Igor Morozov, a Federation's Council Defense Minister member of Ukraine, claimed that Ukrainian experts traveled to Pakistan to meet with a delegation to discuss nuclear weapons technology. So that they've been actually, actively seeking it. This is, in the run-up to the war, that they were actually seeking out that kind of technology. So, really, sorry I can't give you anything more concrete. But what I can say is that nothing is what it seems. I'm 100% confident that the attempts to alleviate public fears about, nuclear escalation with this New START thing is all just smoke and mirrors, guys. All smoke and mirrors. Ukraine has used its wartime powers to seize strategic companies. So this is a great way to kill your economy and make sure that nobody ever wants to return there and do business again. Now, the definition of fascism is the integration of corporation and government. Now, I'm not saying fascism in a cultural sense or anything like that, but I'm just saying that the takeover of these businesses, and these are like the top businesses, the companies were controlled by some of Ukraine's wealthiest and most powerful businessmen. Now, this is not something that, is beneath us. They would do this here as quickly as they would do it there. They'll do it in the States. So probably they've done it in Russia to some extent. Perhaps not to as great of an extent. Mind you, they're not the ones with their backs up the wall being invaded. But this is all just another step in consolidating power and basically issuing this martial law campaign throughout the country of Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war, men between the ages of 18 and 60 have been prohibited from leaving the country. They've banned opposition parties and they've nationalized the media. So now they are basically commandeering these businesses for war-related purposes. And you might say, well, that's what you're supposed to do in war, and maybe you're right, but of course that's going to have very, very drastic economic repercussions. I mean, that's really the nail in the coffin for anybody ever wanting to do business there again. Nobody will ever want to go and invest money if they know that their company is just going to be essentially stolen, right? Whether it's for a good cause or you believe it's for a good cause or not. Europe is bracing for a major refugee crisis because of all of the power cuts in Ukraine, which are only going to continue, right? And just remember, this is why I think that this is also part of a master plan because, and I'm not saying that as like a Russia bro, like this is a good thing. And, maybe it is that the Russians just messed up. Maybe they just really royally screwed up here. It's possible. But the fact that they're gutting all of the critical infrastructure in Ukraine and the fact that they're crippling the ability of Ukraine to resupply all these soldiers that are going to now be spread very thin throughout the front lines tells me that there's probably a bigger plan being hatched here. Anyways, this is going to lead to a massive evacuation from many cities that are not going to be able to sustain such large, densely populated populations. And they're going to have to send them, of course, to Europe. They're saying that just in, which country is this? Slovakia alone, 700,000 more refugees may pour into the country this winter. So we're talking about millions more refugees. We're also seeing a 3-star general to lead the new U.S. command overseeing arming Ukraine. So you think the war is slowing down? You think the Russians are going to really bite on any sort of strategic arms reduction? Like, forget about the Chinese and the fact that they're developing, unfettered. But the idea that the U.S. is actively trying to undermine the Russian economy, and basically, as Biden has admitted, and then of course they walk the comments back, displace Putin, collapse the Russian economy, and now they're sending a 3-star general in there to oversee the arming of Ukraine. The command known as Security Assistance Group in Ukraine, SAG-U, will be based out of U.S. Army Europe and Africa headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany. Its establishment was first announced Friday and will be staffed by about 300 military personnel. Doesn't sound like things are dialing down one bit. On the other side of the world, we have the Chinese president ordering the nation to prepare for war. Xi Jinping has ordered China to prepare for war as he warned his nation's security situation is increasingly unstable. The people I've spoken to predict that China will either do a blockade or outright invade Taiwan by the spring. So that situation is definitely heating up. They are on war alert. And even the Taiwan president has come out in the last 24 hours and said that they could be invaded soon. Okay? It's a very real thing that could happen to us, she continued. There's a genuine threat out there, and it is not hype. I would suspect that U.S. intelligence doesn't penetrate as deep into China as it does in Russia. So perhaps there's more of a fog of war there from an intelligence standpoint. But the Taiwanese are openly concerned. The Chinese are preparing for war, and it's only a matter of time. And like I said, the Chinese don't care if the Russians use a low-yield tactical nuke. I don't think they do. In fact, they'll say they do. They'll say that nuclear war should never be fought. They'll say that war is bad and all of this rhetoric, but they're never going to condemn it. They're never going to vote against it, because when you have the Russians fighting the same enemy, then the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Gotta sneeze. Oh, of course, right when you say you have to sneeze, you never sneeze. Excuse me, until you say it. All right. Russian security chief arrives in Tehran to discuss international issues. So we see those ties building between Russia and Iran. So obviously they're going to be buying more missiles and more drones. And apparently, did I talk about the price of gold going up? I think I may have briefly, but the markets are crashing once again. I would have thought that the markets would have liked the fact that the balance of power remained relatively the same, because usually what the markets hate the most is uncertainty. But, maybe the markets are liking the fact, or maybe there's something else going on. Maybe in the back channels, they know something about the election results that we don't. Maybe it's going to lead to some sort of instability. I personally was surprised, but not so surprised that the Republicans didn't do as well as they did. I guess I could say most people thought the Republicans were going to sweep and have a lot more wins than they have. I think the fact that they haven't should be very concerning for people on that side of the fence, because that shows that in spite of all the internet hype, that the reality was much different. Okay, we've seen this happen before. It happened to Trump's favor the other time when it happened, when everybody thought there's no way Trump's going to beat Hillary, and of course he won, right? So there's this disjunct between what the internet says and what the hype, the perceived hype and the filter bubbles is generating, and what is actually happening in the real world. But the stock market is tanking once again. What else is new? It's coming back down to where it probably should be from a Schiller PE ratio perspective. We have shortages in amoxicillin, of basic painkillers. We lack the raw ingredients to make the drugs, most of which come from China, and a lot of these drugs are manufactured in India. Apparently there's like 183 drugs in the United States right now that are experiencing shortages. And there's even a shortage of turkeys right now, believe it or not. Butter is another thing. The USDA is urging consumers not to panic buy butter so that there will be enough to go around for everyone. Of course, diesel shortage projections as well. Some of this has to do with obviously the COVID bullwhip effect and shutting down diesel plants during COVID, diesel refineries. And there's another factor of this, which is just the ban on Russian imports, which is also having an impact. Peter Schiff, we've had him on the channel before. Go check out our video that we did with him. I think it's holding true to today in his predictions. He is basically saying that the gold train has left the station and that gold has bottomed. As I've always said on this channel, the price of gold doesn't matter, because if the price of gold goes down, that probably means that the money that you're purchasing it in, the value has went up. The whole point of gold is as a hedge against inflation. The whole idea of is that the price doesn't go up or down, at least not that much, okay, by like fractions of a percent over every decade. So I'm not too concerned about whether gold is going to go up in price, because you're going to pay the same amount for it. If gold is going up in price, that means that the dollar that you're purchasing it with is worth less and less. If the dollar goes up again because a new war breaks out, which very well could be the case, if war breaks out with China, the dollar goes high once again, because everybody's going to be scared and they're going to go to what they know. But after that, eventually, when the whole house of cards collapses, he who is holding dollars is going to be screwed when everybody divests and the world deglobalizes. What else do we got going on? I think that's about all I need to talk about today. Thanks for bearing with me. We got a lot of interesting videos that have been in the works. I know it's just been me ranting. We got a video with Guarding in Canada we're releasing this weekend. Ron from Atlas Survival is in the house this weekend. We also have our guest who wrote this book, Nuclear War Survival Skills. We have a couple interviews that we've done with David Pine that are going to be released soon. So stay tuned for that and a whole lot more, guys. Just keep your head on a swivel, stay prepared, and let me know what you make of this whole situation in Kherson with the Russians. What do you think the fallout is going to be? Hopefully, it's not radioactive. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.